In an attempt to reinvigorate and motivate the tourism industry to make a comeback, New York Governor is proposing a stimulus or a one-time payment or a grant scheme that helps both the employers and the workers come back to the labor force. And I think it's an interesting move that we've talked about internally at Daggerfinn in terms of what we project may be happening or what will happen in the future to close the labor shortage or to close the gap between open jobs and participation rate. And so it's interesting to see this come into effect. Basically, the proposal from the New York governor is a $450 million state spending plan. And it proposes that the government will make payments of $2,750, so $2,750 to about 36,000 workers who lost their job during the pandemic and worked in the tourism industry. And on the other side of the equation, it's going to actually provide grants of $5,000 to companies that rehire and employ these workers for 6 months. And so you can make the argument that a lot of the issues in the labor markets were at least initially triggered by the, you can argue, kind of artificial killing of demand that happened with lockdowns and stay-at-home orders and things like that. What that did was it artificially pulled demand out of the market. And with that, of course, a lot of industries that rely a little bit more on disposable income spend, things like tourism and things like that, probably were hit harder than things that were a little bit more mandatory. And so this is an interesting proposal from the government because what it's doing is it's kind of plugging the gap to where it artificially pulled demand out of the market and it's trying to push demand back, or at least bring back demand to where it's at some level of feasible for workers to continue. So I think it's also interesting as a proposal because it addresses both sides of the equation. Not only is it incentivizing workers to go back to work with the $2,750 one-time payment, it also incentivizes companies to hire and then retain these workers with that $5,000 grant per employee. So all in all, this is supposed to cost about $200 million of the $450 million proposal. I think another thing to think about is just how important tourism is to New York State and why this is one of maybe the first iterations of a proposal like this. But for states that lean on certain industries heavier than others, this is something that we may see going forward. So tourism for New York State is its third largest industry, and it employs traditionally 10% of the workers in that state. So this is a major industry for that state, a big revenue generator. And so it's not a bad idea for the government to stimulate and motivate workers to go back to work and then incentivize employers to keep them or rehire workers. You know, a lot of companies, you can imagine, during the last 18 months have figured out ways to continue operating at a lower cost basis. And granted, maybe they've pulled profits back or pulled top line revenue down to match a lower cost base, but people get used to things pretty easily, and so this gives everybody not only an opportunity to get back to work, but for companies at least to ramp up as well if necessary. So this is a cool proposal. It's interesting to see from a labor shortage standpoint. We'll definitely be keeping an eye on whether this passes and how this works, because this could serve as a litmus test for how government could actually help close the gap between participation rates and a number of open jobs, the two lines on the graph. And it could be a way that government could really allocate its resources in a way that's actually conducive to getting the economy back to where full employment looks like full employment, not what this is right now, where we have 4.6% unemployment, but 10 million open jobs and for hire signs everywhere. So interesting to think about, a good news story to keep an eye on going forward.